Good afternoon, committee members and witnesses. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 23 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Some people are appearing virtually, including committee members, and the rest are here present in the room. I would expect we would all follow existing safety protocols related to the pandemic while we're here. And for members participating virtually, use translation services at the bottom of the screen, as well as those in the room. Translation services are there. I would ask any member to notify me if we lose translation services, interpretation services, so we can suspend while they're being corrected. Welcome to the committee today, Monsieur Trudel from the Bloc Québécois and Mr. Maurice from the Green Party. And I would advise that members appearing on screen use the raised hand icon to notify me when they want to get my attention to be recognized. As well as members in the committee room would raise their hand. I will maintain a speaking order as identified. I want to also thank the witnesses for being here today and understanding our delay, because the Commons does take precedence. I had an early discussion with members of the committee, and if I get agreement, then we'll proceed with all the witnesses giving their opening statements at once, and then we would go into a full round of questioning to conclude the meeting. Do I get consensus from committee members to approach that way? Okay, I do. Thank you, committee members. I will identify the witnesses that are appearing. We have from Build Calgary region, Brian Han, who I spoke to earlier. Welcome. Cooperative Housing Federation of British Columbia, Tom Armstrong. And I forgot to recognize Madame Zerillo. The Rose Corporation, Sam Reisman. Appraisal Institute of Canada, Andrea Poulot and Keith Landcastle, Canadian Home Builders Association, Kevin Lee, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Daniel Rubenstein. And what I would advise each of the witnesses, you have 5 minutes to give your opening comments or less, and I will advise all the witnesses to please stay within the 5 minutes because our timing is condensed today. And also, when we open the floor to questions, realize your questions as well as the answers take up the allotted time for the committee members. So if you could keep concise, then we will get through all our list of questions. I will start with Build Calgary region for 5 minutes. Mr. Han, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, members of the Standing Committee, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to address you today on a very important matter for Canadians, housing supply and home affordability. I am the CEO of Build Calgary Region. We are a not-for-profit association representing the diverse voices of approximately 600 member organizations involved in all aspects of land development and the home building industries. We are part of a 3-tiered organization affiliated with our provincial colleagues at Build Alberta and nationally with the Canadian Home Builders Association. As you will see, I have my colleague from the Canadian Home Builders Association, Kevin Lee, CEO of CHBA, beside me. The primary goals of our members are to ensure affordable, vibrant redevelopment of established neighbourhoods and development of new communities. Accordingly, Build Calgary Region advocates for affordability, innovation, and choice in the new home building industry. Notwithstanding more recent price increases in demand and prices, Calgary region house prices are amongst the most affordable when compared to other major Canadian metropolitan areas. Certainly, a meaningful measure of credit for that needs to go to the City of Calgary as well as the municipalities surrounding Calgary for their effort. Similar recognition is due to our developer, builder, trade, and supplier members for their diligence, creativity, innovation, and commitment to affordability. However, in recent years, we have seen this house price advantage erode with significant increases in demand as supply struggles to keep pace. As this relative affordability erodes, the prospect of buying a home has become increasingly more daunting for many in the Calgary area, including first-time home buyers. The matter of market-priced home affordability is often dinner table conversation with our 4 young adult children. Like my wife and I when we were their age, our children and their partners seek the independence and security of owning their own home. Our members agree with the aims in the most recent federal budget, most particularly to make housing more affordable. More housing needs to be built, and building more housing will require investments. Like other groups, we believe there is a common need for bricks and mortar. To achieve this, investment in hard assets is required, particularly infrastructure hard assets that build the capacity necessary to create and connect housing supply. These types of assets include water, wastewater, and stormwater lines, as well as treatment facilities, transportation infrastructure, including public transportation, and other community infrastructure such as police, fire, police, and emergency response stations. Investment in those types of connecting hard assets, sometimes called off-site assets, create the capacity required to connect new housing supply. Those same hard asset investments leverage private investment of developers, home builders, and others in the value chain bring, as well as other investments from provincial governments and municipalities to create housing supply. We believe there will be returns for all those investors, including all orders of government that invest. Returns to government and generation of public wealth will come by way of incremental income taxes, property taxes, utility revenues, and the like, all driven by the associated employment growth, and private investment. Further, we support the goal to incentivize cities and towns that are stepping up to get more housing built. Any program to drive a particular result must have an associated reasonable set of measurement. Simply put, what gets measured gets done. We encourage fully transparent measurement and reporting of all government funding for housing, including demonstration of the value for dollar on those investments. To support this, we encourage adoption of a set of guiding principles similar to those adopted by the City of Calgary for their off-site levy program. Those guiding principles could include commitments to financial sustainability and resilience, accounting for the benefits development brings to municipalities, competitive attraction of private investment, genuine collaboration and consultation between government and industry, full transparency and accountability in respect of public and developer funds, and alignment and compliance with applicable laws. Lastly, we encourage all orders of government to support the development of a competitive Canadian supply chain capacity. There may be many lessons to be heeded from our collective experience over the pandemic, but competitively improving national self-reliance is almost certainly one which will serve Canadians well in the uncertain international future. On behalf of Build Calgary Region and our members, thank you for your focus on the important matter of investment in leading infrastructure and supporting housing, in support of housing supply and improving market-priced home affordability for Canadians. I'm available for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Han. Thank you for getting in under the 5. And we'll now go to, as all the witnesses know, we conclude all the opening comments, then we go to the round of questionings. Mr. Armstrong from the Cooperative Housing Foundation.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to appear before the committee to discuss the proposed Housing Accelerator Fund. My name is Tom Armstrong. I'm the CEO of the Cooperative Housing Federation of British Columbia. CHFBC is a province-wide federation of housing co-ops. We serve 260 co-ops with more than 14,000 member households. We're also a group of social enterprises, including Coho Management Services and the Community Land Trust Foundation. Our main offices are in Vancouver, on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I pay my respects to the original stewards of these lands. So the government proposes to invest $4 billion in a new housing accelerator fund, with the goal of increasing housing supply in Canada's largest cities by removing barriers to building housing more quickly. So I want to start by saying whether this fund is successful in achieving its objectives will depend in large measure on how it's structured and, more importantly, how it's targeted. So in our view, the government should target its investment in the proposed fund to serve 4 main objectives. Firstly, build new homes that are permanently affordable to low and moderate income households, those households who are most acutely disadvantaged in local housing markets. Secondly, free up land for nonprofit and co-op developers to reduce the cost of housing development. Thirdly, incentivize partnerships between municipalities and the community housing sector and its developers, such as community land trusts, to increase the supply of non-market housing in larger municipal centers. And finally, allow municipalities to prioritize the acquisition of existing purpose-built rental properties by the community housing sector if and where it can be shown to achieve the same or similar net outcomes in affordable homes. So I'll speak to each of these very briefly. First, on targeting. Some citizens clearly are more challenged than others to find affordable housing. And there's no evidence or scant evidence to suggest that investing in untargeted new supply will improve housing affordability. So we suggest that disbursements from the fund should be made based on measurable performance targets tied to median rents and incomes and reserved for homes that will not be investor owned. As the cost of money, supplies, and labor all increase, we're seeing this daily and weekly, grants will be needed to fill the equity gap that's currently a significant barrier to affordability. These grants can come from the fund, or they can be combined with funds from other programs under the umbrella of the National Housing Strategy. The point is that they need to be stacked and they need to be automatic and not subject to individual or separate application processes. Secondly, the fund should be structured to create incentives for municipalities to provide land at nominal rates to community housing developers. I know free land is not enough these days to guarantee affordability. I wish it was, but without it, we have no chance. Thirdly, in some parts of the country, and I think of Vancouver and Toronto here, community land trusts and other social purpose housing developers are leveraging partnerships with municipalities to build entire portfolios of permanently affordable nonprofit and co-op homes. These homes become even more affordable over time as they're held out of the market and operated on a not-for-profit basis by capable community-based housing providers, and the fund should encourage an expansion of these partnerships to build even more permanently affordable homes. In Vancouver, our community land trust is in the process of adding 2,300 new nonprofit and co-op homes to various communities in the province that start at an average of 60% to 75% of average market rents, and those only get more affordable over time. Finally, I didn't imagine I would be saying this if I were speaking to this issue 6 or 12 months ago. As financing and development costs continue to increase, it may be prudent in some markets and during some economic cycles to consider the acquisition of existing purpose-built rental properties as a complement to new supply. The community housing sector has been advocating for the development of capital programs to facilitate the purchase of older rental properties that are currently targeted by real estate investment trusts and other investors, and deploying some of the fund's resources to this end may slow, if not reverse, this growing loss of affordable homes in overheated rental markets. So in summary, the Housing Accelerator Fund can have a positive impact on housing supply and affordability, but only if it is tightly targeted to encourage the development of new homes that will be affordable to low and moderate income households, or to fund the acquisition of already affordable homes to move them out of the market into what one commentator called speculation-free zones. Municipalities will not be able to go it alone. Partnerships with the community housing sector will be the key to the achievement of these objectives. And I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak to this issue today.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. And now Sam Reisman with the Rose Corporation. Mr. Reisman, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share some ideas with the Standing Committee. I'll briefly touch on some initiatives that we're currently working, that I think are working, ones that might be expanded, and other novel approaches. My comments are generally directed towards purpose-built apartment buildings in major urban centers, but may apply to other locales. The Rose Corporation is a private developer, and it's involved in the development currently of more than 600 units in York Region, 150 of which fit into some level or definition of affordable. In 2017, we completed the first built rental development, purpose-built rental development in the region, literally in generations. That's a problem. Our observation is that all purpose-built rental housing is good for the community and remains the least expensive form of conventional housing. CMHC's commitment to shelter every Canadian in a home they can afford by 2030 is laudable, and their programs are forward-thinking, but they cannot accomplish this alone. Affordable housing will require all levels of government to buy in and do their part. Fundamental changes of perspective need to be made to confront the challenges head-on. First, by beginning to recognize that this is a crisis that has been generations in the making, and it will take generations to get right. So it follows that we must collectively recognize that affordable housing is long-term investment whose benefits are also realized over an extended time frame. Using measurements that overemphasize short-term metrics in early years will lead to some optimal result. Second, government policy impacting affordable housing needs to be well coordinated. Currently, federal, provincial, regional, and municipal governments are largely acting as independent agents. The result I've recognized and I've seen is a mismatch of incentives that literally don't speak to each other, as the same word, even affordability, is defined by each government agency very differently. While CMHC's programs are far and away the most cohesive and well thought through, and listing the other levels of government around a set of consistent values that are flexibly applied would result in expansive and cost-effective programs. Some recommendations. Given the current circumstance, CMHC should establish a liaison office to coordinate the various government initiatives and stimulate others. The $4 billion, a sliver of it, would help accelerate this, and I can't overemphasize the value of doing so. Another suggestion, to eliminate CMHC's requirement to retire the mortgage debt for the duration of affordability. What that effectively means is have interest-only loans on certain qualified buildings. Third, develop new market-priced apartment buildings that are immediately placed under rent control. We saw the experiment in Ontario effectively by accident when Ontario, really in a haphazard manner, threw on rent controls from 1970s on, when the industry changed to turn to condominiums. But in the meantime, paradoxically, it formed a whole category of affordable homes that many people are living in now, that provide basically the affordable rental stock that we see. So if we put them immediately under rent control now at market prices, we'll find that this solves a longer-term problem. Some simple examples of cost or risk reductions. Remove the requirement to assess HST on all new rental developments. That would reduce rents by about 5%. Property taxes, although a provincial matter, are the single largest component of operating costs of an apartment building. It's about 10%. The province, working with the federal government, coordinating with them, could encourage the creation of lower property tax assessment classifications for new apartment buildings. There's a compelling rationale, which I can't go through here, for the assessment of to run about 50% of the normal rate. A 50% reduction in property taxes would reduce rents 5%. Interest rate fluctuations are the single greatest constraint in underwriting new apartment development. Currently, CMHC goes a long way in mitigating that risk through its RCF5 program. Nonetheless, the debt service payments change wildly as rates change. I suggest that to qualified buildings and qualified developers, that the payments be fixed even as the rate may vary. Development charges are about 10% of cost. If they were deferred, then rents could be reduced by approximately 7%. This has been a very effective policy in York Region, and the program should be expanded. Land values are more variable, but as a percentage of cost can be, for purpose of discussion, be pegged at around 10%. If the federal provided grants, that would be provide 7% in reductions. In the last 5 points, I've identified cumulatively how rents could be reduced in an entire building 25%, and by simple math, it would be 50% if it was half the building. Stepping out of my area of expertise, I would suggest that a negative income tax directed at subsidy to the individual low-income family strikes me as a very efficient way to do it. Subsidies as low as $500 a month would dig deeply into the affordability crisis, and $1,000 per month would have an immediate, overwhelming impact. My observation, though anecdotal, I believe would be backed up by research. Creating a sinking fund with the $4 billion or part of it to direct it that way, I think would have a very ameliorative effect and could be part of a going forward program. I know that I'm 6 minutes, and so I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Eastman. You could follow up on your points in the question round. I'm sure you'll get questions. Thank you for your comments. The Appraisal Institute of Canada, gentlemen, I forget which one was going to do the statement.
That will be
your
me,
5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman.
Mr. Lancaster?
Thank you very much.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to be here. We're privileged and honored to be before the committee today and appreciate the opportunity to provide our comments on the design and rollout of the proposed Housing Accelerator Fund, as well as to provide some suggestions regarding how the government can build on the federal lands initiative to help increase housing supply. By way of background, the Appraisal Institute of Canada has over 5,600 members that annually complete over 1 million appraisals, valuing over $1 trillion worth of real property. Our members provide independent third-party opinions of value on residential, commercial, agriculture, and industrial real property, and this also includes machinery and equipment. Professionally qualified and designated appraisers continue to be an essential part of Canada's real estate market. Working alongside home builders, realtors, mortgage brokers, developers, and home buyers, appraisers form an integral part of Canada's real estate market. Our members work to meet internationally recognized valuation standards that help to mitigate risks and stabilize the real estate market by ensuring lenders, insurers, consumers, and others make informed decisions. Appraisers also work with governments at all levels to ensure values are accurately expressed and that policy objectives are met. This includes work in property tax, feasibility studies, expropriation, as well as acquisition and disposition. As a self-regulatory body, we have a strong focus on consumer protection. We maintain a rigorous disciplinary process and provide a mandatory professional liability insurance program to help protect consumers and our members' clients. We're also proud to say that we've recently created a Council on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion to expand opportunities for aspiring appraisers and to do our part to help combat bias and discrimination in the real estate market. Now for the subject and discussion that is before us today, which is to address Canada's housing crisis by, in part, bringing on additional housing supply to the market. I should say that rising housing prices is not a new issue. Over the past decade, federal government policies have been primarily focused on addressing the demand side of the housing continuum. And while recent investments in affordable housing, the first-time homebuyer incentive, have helped to alleviate some of the pressures on the housing market, more can and needs to be done. The pandemic has highlighted the need for more targeted policies to help increase the supply of housing in Canada. While affordable housing initiatives have had some positive impact, housing affordability continues to be a major issue for middle-income Canadians. Demand is expected to persist given several factors, including strong household formation and immigration rates that are set to return to pre-pandemic levels. Supply and demand factors have historically shown themselves to be one of the major drivers of housing prices. When supply is curtailed, appraisers will see prices go up, sometimes dramatically. However, when supply increases, the competition decreases, which will, over time, put downwards pressure on housing markets and prices. Regardless of what may or may not happen over the next 12 to 18 months in terms of interest rate increases and other macroeconomic uncertainties, the need for more housing units remains. Increasing the housing supply cannot be achieved without collaboration and coordination amongst all levels of government. And while there is no silver bullet or single policy that can change things overnight, we do believe supply is perhaps the most key solution to a more balanced marketplace. The newly announced but yet to be launched Housing Accelerator Fund is in our minds a step in the right direction, but it must be implemented rapidly and should focus on housing affordability, independent of and in addition to efforts focused on affordable housing. The fund must address the key challenges to new supply, which by all accounts include municipal restrictions or hurdles such as zoning, land use, and development restrictions and timelines, while recognizing that NIMBYism will continue to be a factor. Incentives to encourage efficiencies in permitting and approval should also be included. Automation of those processes could alleviate much of the administrative burden and compress timelines. We also believe that other initiatives should be considered, such as the Government of Canada requiring that infrastructure grants only go to areas that have mechanisms that allow for expedited development. Supporting provinces and municipalities in addressing these challenges, whether it be financially or in some cases, and perhaps more importantly, politically, will go a long way in delivering new supply to the market. In terms of the federal lands initiative, whether it is to build, replace, or repair existing infrastructure, or to ensure special projects are completed effectively and efficiently, government needs to make these complex and at times difficult decisions in an inclusive and consultative way, while ensuring a timely and appropriate delivery. The importance of these decisions makes it vital that the right expertise and experience is applied throughout the decision-making process, and that expertise should always include opinions of value prepared by professional appraisers. Buying property or a place to call home is a major milestone in all Canadians' lives, and appraisers from across Canada look forward to working with government at all levels to protect Canadians and help them make informed decisions. Mr. Chair, honourable members, we appreciate the chance to be here with you today and to share our feedback, and we look forward to your questions or comments that you or your colleagues may have. Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. Now to Mr. Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Canadian Home Builders Association, or CHBA, representing some 9,000 member companies in the residential construction sector, thank you for the opportunity to provide the association's input on the development of the Housing Accelerator Fund. CHBA welcomes the recognition by the government that housing policy in Canada should address the needs of Canadians along the full housing continuum, and is very glad to see that a proper focus is now finally being brought to bear on housing affordability for market rate housing. The federal government has taken extensive steps in recent years to address affordable housing through its national housing strategy to support those in core housing need. But affordable housing and housing affordability are related but very different things that require very different action. Now, via the Housing Accelerator Fund, market rate housing affordability has the chance to be addressed by focusing on the most critical factor affecting market rate home prices, housing supply. If designed and implemented properly, the fund is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to address the market rate housing affordability and supply crisis. The $4 billion fund is aimed at growing the house supply of middle-class homes by 100,000 additional units over and above normal activity by 2025. But even more importantly, the fund is an opportunity to help put in place the processes, systems, and environment to pursue the 3.5 million additional homes that we need over the next decade to address the housing supply deficit. To help boost market rate supply, the fund can and should incent and support municipalities to address several current challenges and barriers to getting more market rate supply online faster that will result in permanent systemic change. For example, the fund can help municipalities pre-zone for gentle densification, including infill, as well as mid-rise and high-rise height to increase density, as well as rezone away from single-family to multi-family zoning. It can also increase and enforce as-of-right zoning, which will help avoid process delays. The fund should be designed and implemented to include supporting permanent improvements to municipal processes, such as permitting, zoning, inspection, and approval systems, including implementing e-systems. The fund should also be used to support onboarding and training curricula development for building officials, especially permanent e-learning systems versus time-limited in-person training. Given the retirement wave coming to building officials, the fund could also be used to accelerate the hiring of new city staff, to help deal with backlogs now, and to get new staff trained and experienced before more retirements and knowledge leave the system. Another monumental challenge to getting any and all forms and tenure of housing built, including rental, is NIMBYism. A national NIMBY to YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard campaign for housing of all forms and tenure is needed to educate Canadians about the inclusive communities that we need for the future. The fund should also be designed to help address high development taxes, which are a large part of high house prices. These taxes, which include development charges, development cost charges, amenity fees, levies, and all kinds of other names for taxes, are a significant contributor to housing costs. These development taxes have gone up by 700% in the past 20 years, from $1 billion to nearly $8 billion across the country, with the worst cases in large urban centres. As we understand it, the design of the fund is looking at basing the transfer of funds to municipalities on actual performance of increased housing stock over and above the current pace of development, potentially through measuring increases in building permits. We support this type of performance-based approach. We note that the study that this committee is undertaking specifically mentions inclusionary zoning, or IZ as we call it, as does the budget. Our comment is that if IZ is to be supported, it is critical that its potential pitfalls be avoided. IZ is a tool that requires a certain portion of new developments to be made affordable to people with low incomes. However, if done wrong, as it often is, the outcome is fewer market rate housing units and an increase in the price of market rate housing units, contributing to further erosion of affordability. When municipalities implement IZ and expect developers to subsidize the cost of affordable housing units, they are actually making buyers of new homes pay for the affordable housing unit subsidy. The development community cannot operate without passing on incremental costs of any form to buyers. Without that, development businesses would not be viable. The need for affordable housing units is a societal issue that should be funded by the entire tax base, not by buyers of new homes, especially first-time buyers. Real cost offsets from the city, such as land contribution or reduced development taxes, are required to ensure IZ does not further erode market rate affordability, reduce the number of market rate units, and or rather render the development business untenable. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. And now to Mr. Rubenstein for 5 minutes, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities.
Chair and committee members, I'm Daniel Rubenstein. I'm Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. FCM is the national voice of local governments. We have 2,000 members and we represent 90% of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Nous apprécions chaque occasion de discuter de la façon.
We appreciate any occasion to discuss with the federal government how we can work together to improve people's quality of life and including affordable housing.
No doubt that housing affordability is one of the greatest challenges facing Canada today. And for us, the solution is clear. It's action, and it's coordinated, ambitious, immediate action from federal government, from provincial and territorial governments, of course, from municipalities and local governments, from our nonprofit housing partners, and from the private sector. Local leaders across the country are ready to do their part to improve housing options for Canadians. And Budget 2022 includes key investments to enable municipalities to take action on the housing crisis. In particular, FCM and our members, we welcome the $4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund. We believe it has transformative potential to help get housing built faster through direct and flexible investments that allow municipalities to tackle the most serious local barriers to supply. We know housing supply is influenced by a variety of factors: access to financing, availability and cost of land, the regulatory context, systems in place to review and approve development applications. And today, we know there's particular attention on the supply chain availability of skilled labor and materials as well. Across the country, cities are putting in place systems to speed up the review and approval of development proposals and to accelerate local and regional level planning. And more can definitely be done in this space with support from HAF. HAF's focus on expanding supply is critical, but more importantly is ensuring that HAF unlocks and accelerates the right supply. And for us, that means both affordable options, both market and non-market, aligned with our shared federal municipal vision of low carbon intensification and transit-oriented development. The right supply also means focusing on the specific local supply gaps unique to each local housing market. In some cities, the challenge might be building enough affordable rental options, particularly family-sized apartments. This is a pretty serious gap in what the market is currently creating on its own. In others, access to and the cost of land is a barrier to transformative projects, especially those that include serious affordability targets. In others, important steps are being taken to improve access to so-called missing middle options, secondary suites, laneway suites, to accelerate TOD and inclusionary zoning. The government's commitment to make sure HAF is flexible to the needs and realities of cities and communities recognizes that housing markets are local and municipalities are best placed to identify what will make the biggest contribution locally to increasing housing supply. We also note and welcome the budget's commitment to achieve a balanced supply that includes a needed increase to the supply of affordable housing, and that's critical for us at FCM. To make HAF a success, it must be designed with municipalities to directly empower action and results. And we have a model that's working well with the Rapid Housing Initiative, RHI. And for us, that means borrowing from the major city stream model that provides flexible upfront allocations to major centers. This gives our major urban centers the predictability, flexibility, and upfront cash flow needed to act fast and ambitiously. And our recommendation is that at least 50% of HAF should be delivered through a major city stream. The other major component of RHI, Rapid Housing Initiative, is an application-based stream that all municipalities have access to. And this kind of stream is particularly well suited to applications focused on improving planning and development review processes, including regional collaborations. I want to note the budget made an important commitment to ensuring that HAF supports rural and smaller communities that are growing quickly. And we know this application-based stream can easily be adapted to include a targeted carve-out for projects from rural and smaller communities. Before concluding, I want to note that HAF's a new addition to the National Housing Strategy, and I've heard from other witnesses today and at your previous meeting about the success being linked to the rest of the broader National Housing Strategy. And the budget did make important commitments to improve the rental construction financing initiative and the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. These program changes are equally important in addressing barriers to expanding affordable housing options for Canadians, and we look forward to contributing our advice on how to optimize those programs as well in the future. Thank you, merci, and happy to participate in the Q&A. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Rubenstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rubenstein.
2 questions, beginning with Mr. General for 6 minutes, and I would ask the committee members to identify who you're directing the questions to, so we can.
Because we have a lot of witnesses, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be back at HUMA committee, my favorite committee. Do just want to, a number of witnesses had made the point that about the accelerator fund focusing on major cities, and that was kind of our impression too when the minister came here and made the comments. However, then the budget said the fund would also include rural areas. So there's been a lot of questions regarding how this program will run, who's eligible, how the application process will work. So I wanted to make sure that all witnesses were on the same page with what we're hearing about this fund as well. But now we're constantly reminding the government that a reason Canada has a housing crisis is because we have that supply issue that so many of you spoke about. Scotiabank has said that Canada needs 1.8 million new homes to get built in a year in order to keep up with demand. And then a report from CIBC just yesterday said that housing supply numbers that are derived by the CMHC are, quote, grossly undercounted. The report also said, and I quote, that the construction industry doesn't have the capacity to meet the government's targets. So with that being said, I'm not sure if you've seen the report, Mr. Lee, but I'll start with you. Would you agree that with the statement that by the CIBC that the construction industry won't be able to keep up with these targets?
I think what I would say is that the targets are really important. To be able to say we need 3.5 million houses over the next decade starts to point out everything that needs to fall into place in order to get there. We have a labor shortage that didn't just materialize over the past few years. It's been many years in the making. It's demographics. It's not unique to residential construction. It's across the board. We need solutions in terms of more Canadians getting into the skilled trades. We need to adjust the immigration system to bring in the right people. We're going to need more joint investment in productivity because, frankly, we're going to need to be able to build more houses with less people moving forward. But I would also say the number, we went from an average of about 200 to 210,000 housing units and housing starts over the past decade. We started 271,000 units last year. So there was some flex in the system. But the bigger issue moving forward is unlocking the ability to continue to do that. And the Housing Accelerator Fund and its intent directed towards municipalities to enable them to unlock some of these processes and delays. That's the number one barrier we have right now to more supply. We need to continue to work on other issues that are related to it, but I think that this fund and targeting supply through municipalities is hitting the number one issue we have, and others will need to continue to work on.
Does it put a lot of pressure on your industry then to keep up with the targets that CIBC has indicated? How is the industry feel about these numbers? I
think the industry feels very positive. I wouldn't call it pressure. I would call it support. This is something we've been talking about for a long time. We've been talking about the issue of accelerating house prices since long before the pandemic. This became a much bigger issue through the pandemic, but, go back to our stuff that we've been talking to the federal government about for the past decade. And we were talking about supply issues. We were talking about development taxes. So we feel now that the lens is being put properly on this. There's a big opportunity to move forward on it.
Okay, so it just took 7 years, but I guess finally it's something that they're decided to focus on. I'll go to you, Mr. Rubenstein. Good to see you again. As always, FCM does a lot of good work. You mentioned some barriers when it comes to the national housing strategy as it exists today. I guess what are some of those that you hope that the accelerator program will address specifically?
Sure. Thanks very much, and nice to see you as well, Mr. Generou. I made the point about the other programs in the NHS to draw a distinction that I think you heard from previous witnesses before, that we have a need to provide a level of subsidy on grants and financing that's appropriate for the kind of affordable housing that we want to build. And that's both for market rental options and for non-market options by the nonprofit partners of our cities. And I'll just note the language in the budget to look at deeper levels of contribution, different kinds of targets for the depth of affordability through those programs. Those are really welcome. And I think what it does by seeing those changes happen in parallel with HAF is it gives HAF the opportunity to be a stacking opportunity and address other barriers like land. I know that's come up as a common theme that we may not be able to deal with through other programs in the NHS. Sorry, Mr.
Rubenstein, just because I have a short bit of time, when it comes to market housing, I know a lot of municipalities struggle with some of your big cities, the Vancouvers, the Torontos, the Burlingtons, Hamiltons, all really struggle with getting that market housing piece. How do you see that this accelerator fund helping from that perspective versus the affordable housing?
Sure, and I think this is where that range of local supply gaps that our members identify and the need for flexibility to direct towards them really matters. And so for some of our members, there's absolutely opportunity to invest in the planning, in the permitting systems, in that soft infrastructure that's required. In other parts of the market, though, we know there's local incentive programs to build and infill. And hopefully HAF can provide another funding tool for our members to experiment with those kind of programs and lever in the private sector into the kind of supply that we know is most needed. So I think it's going to look different center by center, city by city, but absolutely there's a range of gaps and opportunities, both market and non-market, that municipalities are keen to use HAF towards and move fast in that regard.
Mr. Rubenstein, now to Mr. Van Bynen for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be directing my comments towards Mr. Riesman, and that's based largely on the success that we had on a program within our own municipality on the way that we approached it. Sam, I only have 6 minutes. I'd like to get 3 questions, so brevity will win the day. Number one, if you could explain the business model difference between a condominium construction project and a market rental or construction project. Sure. And the reason I'm asking that is that that's what's led to your request or your suggestion for deferral. So I'd like to get a better understanding of how Sure. you get there.
Typical condominiums require 2 things. They require a pre-sale test, and the reason they require that is that they require much larger. You're required between a 25 and 30% equity base, and that comes through the developer. But mostly 2/3 of it would come from the pre-sales. And then you go to the bank and say, please help me build my condo. I've sold 60 or 65%. They give you the money, and you build a bunch of 1-bedroom condominiums that end up getting rented to people that don't really service the community's need. Rental, banks who typically want the same kind of deposit money. Problem is that, or equity money. The problem is, of course, that you don't have the equity source of the purchasers. So what we were able to do is align policy. It took us a long time to work with York Region and the town, and we said, guys, why don't you chip in the development charges? We'll pay them back, but 2 things: could you defer them, and could you effectively subordinate them to bank financing? And the subordination is not technically subordinated, but it's deferred for 20 years, and the banks accept that as equity. As a result of that, we were able to develop now third building we're building. We have a condominium, so 3 buildings that we're building, 600 units I mentioned, all on the back of that program and stacked with some assistance of CMHC as well. But the key really was the deposit money.
You created some affordable housing units within the complex. What was the percentage there?
Sure. In the first building we built, the town could take up to 25% of the units, which would have been 52, 53 units, and use them in their York Region program. We sold that building, so I don't know how much they accessed, but at the time they had access to considerable number before we had sold. On the 2 other buildings, again, different definitions of affordability between CMHC, the region, and the town. But essentially, there's 100 units that would, out of the 400 that were built, 25% of them would be affordable.
You've raised another issue there, and that is the differences in interpretation and criteria for the different lenders. Where would you see that liaison role that you've recommended? Where would you see that seated?
Well, I mean, I've been very impressed with CMHC over the last 3 or 4 years. So I think that the organization, from my perspective, has become pretty flat, and they seem to have their finger on the pulse. They have good stats. They have good data. They have good underwriting. I would, if you know, I'm not that familiar with the hierarchy or the structure, but I would have put the liaison group in there. And I think they have one. I think they have individuals who are doing it. I just don't think they have enough resources to really align the various levels of government. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of lobbying, it takes a lot of thought. We've done that. It took us a couple of years within, the context of my small development, but I think that that office would come out of CMHC, and I think it'd be very effective.
The potential for this fund to buy down the construction costs so that the financing is sustainable with affordable rental. What percentage of the project would you see would need to be bought down?
You mean the interest rates or the capital cost? I'm not sure what you're referring to.
The capital costs, yeah. So,
okay, well,
go ahead.
I think I'd answer the question by not answering. What I would tell you is that the CMHC was able to provide us financing at market rents, at market rates, their market rates, which are subsidized, and that was all we needed. The only problem now is that all of the projects that we have developed and are in the ground now could not be developed on the basis of current market forces. Hard costs or construction costs have gone up 40% in the last 2 years, and so all other things being equal, somebody would have to subsidize the lion's share of that cost in order for us to build another affordable rental.
Okay. Now there's a discussion going on now, I believe in the town of Newmarket as well, where the town has passed a resolution that requires any development approval to have an expiry date. And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that makes sense. I mean, in that particular case, Newmarket, York Region, you have a limited amount of allocation, and as a result of that, it makes all the more sense, because if you're not going to lose it, if you're not going to develop it, then move on. You need to use the allocation somewhere else in order to get units built.
Okay, and then finally,
you got
one
10
final
seconds.
question. What would you do? What do you think is the highest and best use of that $4 billion, Sam?
I think that the most, I got 10 seconds, the most effective thing would be try and experiment and see if you could pay down direct subsidies to individuals, simulate the reverse tax that I spoke about. I'd be interested to see what that would do. I think it would alleviate a lot of affordable situations.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. Monsieur Trudel, à vous la parole pour...
Mr. Trudel, over to you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for having come to talk about the housing crisis, the severe crisis that's current in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada. I think there are 2 major problems with regard to this crisis. Accessibility, that we need more housing units, and it has to be more affordable. The housing has to be less expensive so that people can access it. And the government, we've heard this week that this housing strategy only met 4.8% of the needs of people who are in urgent need of housing. And in other words, 30% of their income for housing. And so there are a lot of strategies, there are a lot of funds, a lot of money, but and all this since 2017. And with this fund, and for Mr. Armstrong, with this funding, it's a lot of money, $4 billion. Do you think that this new program can change the situation and improve accessibility and improve affordability?
I would say it can, but the key factor will be whether it can be effectively stacked with other programs. The contribution levels that we're talking about under some of the scenarios we've seen sketched out wouldn't be enough to plug the entire equity gap, between, economic and market rent, or between market rent and affordable rent. So I'd say depending on how carefully the money is targeted, and you always have to remember that whenever we're talking about subsidizing housing development, the critical question is, who are we trying to house? Then it can have the potential of being very effective. Again, as long as it's stacked effectively with other programs, and not just federal programs, also with provincial programs where they in fact exist.
Thank you very much. And another question. Many commentators say that, generally speaking, we should send more money to nonprofit organizations who are better placed to ensure affordability over the long term, because unfortunately many of the investment programs for rental housing, after a certain period of time, the units are no longer affordable. As affordable as they were when they were first coming on the market. For example, the program that provides 100% of the cost. Do you think we should give more funding to that type of program rather than the new program that we're announcing here?
I certainly think that's a valid point to be making. A lot of people like to wax nostalgic about some of the older tax incentive programs, the MERBs and the ARPs. But, if you wander around your community today and try and find one of those developments, they've typically been flipped several times. All the affordability has been washed out of them. The new agreements around purpose-built rental construction tend to have very modest ambitions when it comes to affordability. The agreements are short-term. The affordability targets address a very shallow level of affordability. So, if you want to achieve deep, lasting, and permanent affordability, I think you need to align the mission of the housing developers with the outcomes that you're looking for. And that would, to me, lead to the conclusion that the more development you can spark through the community housing sector, which has a lot more development capacity today than it did 10 years ago, then the more lasting outcomes you're going to generate. Because housing, the thing that people forget most is that housing is never less affordable than on the first day the door opens. And then over time, as it gets managed, refinanced, and invested in, it becomes more and more affordable if it's being operated as a not-for-profit housing business. So I would tie the results to the 10-year model and expect that performance to deliver an enormous return on investment to the government.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Rubenstein from FCM. And the new fund, it's $4 billion, of course, for the municipality, for the housing. It's a huge investment in housing. But in Quebec, this fund kind of worries us because there's been 3 years that we haven't been able to, the federal government hasn't been able to agree with the Quebec government for housing funding, and if this there have been investments, and we talk about funding for Toronto and elsewhere, but not so much for Quebec because we haven't had the negotiations that are needed.
Thanks, Mr. Tudela. If I understand the question, it's about making sure that all parts of the country have access to the funding, and I can assure you that's very much top of mind for our Quebec members. I can't speak for how the federal government will work with the province of Quebec to deliver, but I will say that we know with the Rapid Housing Initiative and other programs, we were able to make sure that there has been funding delivered on the ground in Montreal, Laval, Longueuil, Gatineau, Quebec, elsewhere in the province for housing options. And certainly we want to make sure that happens here with the Accelerator Fund. And there's opportunities to, to the earlier point about stacking and alignment. I fully agree with the comments about stacking within the federal programs. Likewise, we know in the affordable housing space, there's models within provinces, including in the province of Quebec, that can be tapped into. So look forward to seeing how that happens, but share the interest in making sure there's as limited delay to that access as possible.
Merci, Monsieur Tudela.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Madame Zerillo, 4-6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really thank all of the witnesses today. And I think that it would be great to have testimony like this for all city councillors and even the planning departments of municipalities across the country. I'm going to start with Mr. Langcastle, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Armstrong to ask a little bit about protection of co-ops and purpose-built rental. If I get at Mr. Hahn, if I get the opportunity, I'd like to talk to you about operating agreements, expirations, and how those need to look going forward. And Mr. Reisman, I'd love to, if I get to you, but if I don't, I'd like to understand on those municipalities that are underwriting some of this purpose-built, are they underwriting with municipal reserves or assets, and what is the risk? And if I don't get a chance to ask you, if you wouldn't mind sending that in writing by email, that would be awesome. So starting with Mr. Langcastle with assessment, I'm so pleased that you are here. The amount of times that I have been questioning highest and best use around assessment, and really I feel strongly that the Assessment Authority is a wonderful organization, but that the highest and best is not keeping up with the societal impacts of assessing land and only on market value. So I've always wanted to separate highest and best. We're losing many businesses on our high streets, local businesses that are being rezoned, and then they immediately become more valuable as a piece of land than in an asset to the community. So my question to you, Mr. Langcastle, and I keep getting told by BC Assessment that it can't be touched, but is there any conversations happening at the Assessment Authority around separating highest and best, the art and the science in the assessment of land in these current conditions?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And while I will say that we have a number of our individual members that work in assessment authorities, including places like BC Assessment across the country, we would not presume to speak for the assessment authorities. I will say, though, in terms of highest and best use, that is a fundamental principle of valuation, but it does recognize in arriving at a value for a subject property the need and the requirement for the use of the property to be legally permitted. And I think when we talk about that degree of flexibility and that need for all parties to come to the table and look at innovative and different ways, perhaps to zone properties, to allow for more innovative approaches to bring more housing supply on the market. That's why we believe very strongly there are no silver bullets. But we do have to address the whole question of NIMBYism. I appreciate my colleague Mr. Lee's YIMBYism. That will be one I will borrow on a go-forward basis. But I think it is really about looking at this in a whole new way and really bringing everyone to the table that can play a role. And highest and best use has to be a premise, because at the end of the day, regardless of whether it's a lender, a commercial lender, or a government or an individual that's making the investment, they have to understand that value is going to be there down the road. But moving the needle on some of those other factors can really help shift the energy and shift focus there.
Thank you. And I do agree, we need to look at it differently. My concern is even if the OCP changes without a rezone, they automatically apply a probability that it will be rezoned, which in my opinion is pushing or forcing a redevelopment where the current use, the value to the community of the current use is not being considered in any way. That's the one conversation that I hope happens when we reimagine what this should look like, because I understand redevelopment needs to happen, but the phasing of redevelopment to support the needs in the community are important. And I'm interested in having further conversation on what that could look like. Mr. Armstrong, I just wanted to go to you. You mentioned that, you've had a change of heart or thought on the protection and the maintenance of purpose-built rental. And I also want to add to that on the co-ops, because we know they're disappearing at an alarming rate. And I can't remember which of the witnesses, but talked about, who are we serving in this housing? So I just wanted to ask around how potentially the accelerator fund could be used to protect purpose-built rental and co-op rental right now that is serving the community, that we need to wait till we have affordable supply on hand before we can start to take these down.
Well, I'm ever glad you asked that question. I was hoping that we'd all get a chance to answer your first question, because is there any higher or better use for housing than to provide safe, secure, affordable housing in a community-based setting? But anyway, that's someone else's expertise. The reason we kind of shifted our attention to acquisition is because of the trend we see in the markets. The governments everywhere, and particularly BC and Quebec and the federal government, are investing a lot of money in new affordable supply programs. But because the existing purpose-built rental stock is being captured by investors at a rate of, in BC, 3 homes for every 1 new home being built under the affordable housing programs sponsored by the government, even if we're wildly successful in accomplishing all of the goals of the announced programs around new supply, we'll still experience a net loss of affordable homes at the end of the 10-year period of the National Housing Strategy. And that would be, maybe an understatement to say that would be a suboptimal outcome for the program. So we have recommended that, especially in this economic cycle where in our business, construction costs are going up at the rate of 2% a month. The cost of money is expanding. The last government, we were sharing some observations among the witnesses before we started, and the last Bank of Canada announcement cost us $4 million overnight on the capital cost and the debt service of one of the affordable housing developments that we're looking at. Now, we don't have any control over that, but it seems to me that we need to create some flexibility in the fund as it's been announced, so that we can turn the focus of the fund where we'll have the most impact. And maybe that, for the time being, in certain markets, is the acquisition of purpose-built rental stock that's at risk of being captured. The tenants are at risk of being displaced, and rents will inevitably climb to deliver the return that investors legitimately expect from the acquisition of those assets.
Great. Thank you. And we
Madame
heard alarming
Cirillo?
testimony. Yeah, am I done?
Oh, we're over by a minute, Madame
Okay,
Cirillo.
I just wanted to
You
let
can
Mr.
get to that
Armstrong
point
know.
in your next round. Mr. Ruff for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for coming. My first question will be to FCM, and it's just sort of, again, to make sure it's clear on the record that despite the mandate letter for the minister around the Housing Accelerator Fund being really just focused on housing supply in our largest cities, that there is going to be, based on the budget and your understanding representing all municipalities or the vast majority of them across the country, that funding is going to be made available to rural communities. For example, I got one project that I was just got briefed on earlier this week, St. Clair's, which is focused on affordable housing, apartment units for seniors. and yet they're impacted alone on so many costs due to the construction costs that have gone up, and where they were originally funding $3 million for the construction, it's now estimated at $7 million. So can you just clarify, is your understanding this fund will be made available for urban and rural areas?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And we have a board of directors of urban and rural mayors and councillors, and the housing crisis is being felt everywhere. That's for sure, and those cost increases are being felt everywhere. I think the budget clearly indicates that the fund will be accessible to rural and smaller communities that are growing quickly. We welcome that. And the comment I made earlier in my opening remarks is just to suggest a way to make sure that rural and small communities have access to the program in a predictable way, creating a carve out where they're not competing against the economics of programs that are for larger centers makes sense. So there's a way to do that, and again we welcome that deliberate focus on access in the ultimate delivery of HAF.
Thank you. So I guess my next question it'll likely go to three of the witnesses, likely Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Lee, and back to you, Mr. Rubenstein, as well. I have another cooperative that Glassworks that's in my riding that's just in the process of building not-for-profit, really affordable, sustainable, multi-generational housing that's encompassing with even business opportunities and everything that's needed. However, they're running into some challenges that's maybe more on the municipal level with respect to rezoning, the charges that the municipalities are levying against these not-for-profits. But it's not just that. I have other developments in the area where they run into challenges with the conservation authorities. They're just delaying the process. These are all things that, we fully acknowledge the need to make sure we're not doing damage to the environment, et cetera. But once they've been through that, it's just the delay and the impact that has. So I just like all three witnesses that I mentioned take on that. We'll start with Mr. Armstrong on the co-op side, please.
Well, whether you're developing a nonprofit co-op or a high-end purpose-built rental or a strata, the cost of development and the impact of development costs is the same. I'll give you just one concrete example. The City of Victoria, just in the last month, adopted a very progressive zoning policy that actually eliminates the rezoning and public hearing process for an affordable housing development that's consistent with the official community plan and local design guidelines. Now, for a project that we have underway in Vancouver, so the redevelopment of a 31-unit housing co-op, had that policy been in place in the City of Vancouver when we began the development process, it would have saved us 9 months and the cost of money for that 9 months, roughly $650,000 in capital costs, given the increase in construction and interest rates and other soft costs, and it would have reduced the day one rents in that redeveloped co-op by $200 a month on average. So there's a very tangible example of the impact that what would seem to be quite minor improvements in the rezoning process can have on the cost of an affordable housing development. And I would say that's just one example among many. Everything you do to add time or money to a new or a redeveloped housing project, whether it be a co-op or a nonprofit.
Thanks, Mr. Armstrong. I do want to get Mr. Lee. Can you expand a bit?
Yeah. We need as of right zoning so that once something is zoned for a specific height, it can go through and not face all kinds of additional processes. We need height in zoning that is realistic and not as the starting negotiating point after which the city will seek to extract more dollars for every additional story that goes on. Let's figure out what the height is supposed to be and then let the development community respond to that. And to the point of, development taxes, there's a perfect example of who should be paying for affordable housing, the entire tax base. Well, by waiving development taxes, you would be able to create the difference in many cases to create affordable units without trying to put it on the backs of new home buyers. So hopefully that covers a few of your areas.
Thank you.
Time is over. Now Mr. Collins for 5.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for all the witnesses for attending today. At the outset, when I presented the motion to committee, for me, the goal and objective was purpose-built rentals, affordable rentals for families. And one thing that I've learned over the years is that as we've witnessed both the private sector and 3 levels of government try to assist with the affordable housing crisis that we have, many, or if not most of the units are bachelors and 1-bedrooms. And what's left behind are those families that sit on affordable housing wait lists across the country who may have 2 or 3 children and require something more than a 1-bedroom or a bachelor unit. And so I guess my first question would be through to Mr. Armstrong. How do we ensure that, you talked about incentivizing the partnerships. How do we incentivize larger units for families who might be struggling with affordable housing issues across the country in whatever province they sit in or live in, and whatever affordable housing wait list they're on?
Well, the short answer is you need to be prepared to invest enough money in capital and operating subsidies to plug the equity gap. In our community land trust, 40% of the new homes we develop are either 2 or 3-bedroom homes intended for the families you're speaking of who can't find an affordable place to live, generally in private sector developments. It's just not economic. So there needs to be an investment to plug the gap to make it economic and make it consistent with the mission of the nonprofit or co-op developer.
Thanks, Mr. Armstrong. A subsequent question would be, you mentioned your second bullet point was to free up land. And so for me, that's a key point. I know that the City of Hamilton is anxious to receive resources from the federal and provincial government in terms of resources to purchase land in order to forge partnerships with either the private sector or for not-for-profits. How have you managed, or what benefit would come to you and your organization and other nonprofits in BC and elsewhere with the provision of land?
It's absolutely critical. I mean, almost, I'd say 7 or 8 years ago, we could have said that free land was enough to generate the viability you need to create significant affordability. That's no longer the case. But, we developed 4 sites made available to us by the City of Vancouver on 99-year leases for, $10 each. And we've built 358 homes on those 4 sites, all coming in at around 65 to 68% of market rents in year 1 and getting more affordable over time. So that's the impact that investment in land can have. I would say to municipalities, never, ever sell your land. Make it available on advantageous lease terms to community housing developers. They will deliver the affordability you need, not just for 5 years or 10 years, but forever.
Thanks for that. My subsequent question would be around the whole issue of the how the money flows through to those who are applying for it. From Hamilton, I know our complaint was that it took us a very long time to receive the funds from CMHC as it relates to the national housing monies that were made available to us through the co-investment fund. How do you see? How do you envision this fund operating in that regard, and to ensure that the money flows very quickly and gets to those who are applying for it in a timely way so that those units can be constructed almost immediately?
I think the answer is in the question. Those funds have to flow immediately. The 2 things that community housing developers need to have access to is, first of all, risk capital, and second, patient capital. And, as I've said in another conversation, CMHC at times has a lot of use in the kind of developments that we need to have underway. So as long as you're pre-qualified and you've met the, what I hope are quite stringent underwriting conditions for a new development, that money has to flow early in the process so that you're not left, especially as a nonprofit developer, with all of the assets you have at your disposal at risk.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, I think I've got about 30 seconds left. Thanks. And my last question would be the criteria, Tom, that should be or could be applied to the application process. We've heard from many of the witnesses today, transit-oriented development, possibly inclusionary zoning, depending on what criteria is included there, higher densities, of course, in urban areas where it makes sense. Do you have any others to include on that list in terms of what the government should consider attaching to the funds?
He's on mute.
Oh, sorry. Everybody has to do it once. I said I agree with all of those. I would add family size housing, housing appropriate for families, and permanent long-term affordability.
Thank you.
As you can see, committee, we're approaching 5:30, but I get a sense of agreement that we'll proceed to conclude this round, which would mean we'd go to Mr. Trudel for 2.5 minutes, then Madame Zarrillo for 2.5, then to Madame Kuzi for 5, and Madame Martinez Ferrata for 5. Do I have an agreement to continue on that? I know the witnesses are available. Okay, Monsieur Trudel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais...
Thank you very much. I have a question, and then I'll let my colleague, Mike Maurice, take the rest of my time. And this will be a quick question to Mr. Rubenstein. We talked about the rapid housing program, which has proved itself, and sometimes it was a bit too rapid, perhaps, for some, I think, 1.5 billion, and then you wanted to have 7 billion, and with these 4 billion in this program, I would wonder if this is a program that will be very useful for for social housing, and will these funds be able to be used for social housing?
Thanks very much. Yes, we did propose ahead of the budget a longer term time frame for the Rapid Housing Initiative. Really welcome the additional funding in the budget. I think we're still hopeful that kind of program will be in a longer term track that allows our members to fund the investments in permanent supportive housing and other homelessness interventions over a 5 or 6 year period. That's certainly the most effective way to go. We also see a tremendous amount of value in this program. It's an additional funding element in the National Housing Strategy. So, ideally our members can fund their interventions on homelessness through RHI. They can fund greater affordability through co-investment if they have access to that, right? And through the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, see market rental through that program. And through HAF can tackle other barriers to supply, as I talked about before, and then stack them together and have a suite of programs that work. And if you don't mind, just on the previous question from Mr. Collins on delivery, this is the essence of why we're recommending using the major city stream for those cities with the greatest capacity. Provide those cities with upfront predictability, let them look at an investment plan, CMHC can review that, and then let them flow that money quickly to their nonprofit partners, to their own delivery agencies, make the decisions on where to invest in land, where to put an incentive program, where to put in capital dollars, where to improve their planning processes. We know what needs to be done. We just need to move quickly, and that's a mechanism that we know works quite well.
Thank you, Chair, et merci, Monsieur Trudel aussi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trudel.
In particular, with the limited time I have, I was wondering if Mr. Rubenstein, you specifically mentioned a huge challenge in my community, and that's with respect to multi-bedroom, multi-unit options for families in particular, that this is not only about the supply of housing, but about the kind of housing that's getting built. And so I'm wondering if you could share more about your specific recommendations for the Housing Accelerator Fund, if it were designed in a way that would lead to not only, we've got a lot of one-bedroom condos being built that are fairly high-end, but deeply affordable over the long term units for 2-3 bedroom units for families.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I might just approach it a little bit philosophically to start, which is I think we need all layers of government to agree on the kind of housing we're trying to produce. And I think we've heard today that one of those primary gaps is in the market side. Where do we create the appropriate family size units? I know that's in reporting that CMHC has had recently too. So that's not just our view. I think that's widely held. And then the question is, how do you solve for that? And I think HAF has the ability, one, if the policy objective is clear about the kind of housing we're creating, not just supply, but the targeted supply. And then second, there's an ability, I think cities are experimenters, right? And we experiment with partnering to achieve certain objectives. If cities have the predictability up front to say, here's a pot of money, what's the bang for the buck? If the lack of appropriately sized market rentals, family sized rentals is one of them. Let cities experiment with solutions to that. And that could be creating incentive programs to help address some of that cost differential. It could be pitching it land. It could be a range of things.
Thank you, Mr. Rubenstein.
Thanks.
Yes, we're over time. Madame Zerillo for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I am going to go back to Mr. Hahn. And I said I was going to ask some questions around expiring operating agreements and operating agreements, but I did want to add a question to Mr. Hahn, if you wouldn't mind to just, I'm getting a sense there is some thought that federal land will be available for sale to private development that partners with not-for-profits. And I just wanted to understand from Mr. Hahn how selling that land could and would impact operating agreements and length of operating agreements with private partners in the not-for-profit community.
So to be clear, our members typically aren't social housing members, and so the context I take operating agreements from you as to whether developers would pay operating agreements on lands that would be developed. I hope I'm gathering that correctly. Generally speaking, our membership believes that municipal taxes should cover the cost of operations of development. It's only in the rarest of circumstances that we would endorse adding operating costs to the cost of development. In the long run, developments need to go around on the capital costs and the tax collections that would come from new housing and new development to offset municipal operating costs. There also needs to be much like's been talked about in terms of improving processes around development approvals and automation of those processes. There needs to be a incentive for efficiency in all aspects of that. And when you look at it in the context which our members come from in Calgary, developers install significant assets on their own and then pay for the capacity of offsite assets. So essentially, the municipality gets the new capital for free and inherits a whole bunch of tax-paying and municipal utility rate-paying customers. So all of that needs to be taken into account, and particularly the fact that new assets are lower-cost assets to operate. And so, from our perspective, we're not as keen about an operating agreement after development.
Okay, and that's interesting, Mr. Hunt, because some of those assets.
Madame Zerillo, very short. You have 20 seconds.
Okay, can I ask Mr. Reisman to answer that question just about the underwriting of risk by municipalities when there's no pre-sales involved?
Yes, a short answer.
All right. They're putting up development charge money. It's basically registered against the property. They'll receive the money by way of tax under any circumstances, but after the period of time of affordability, 10 or 20 years. So
and what's the risk? Who takes the risk if it?
Well, you have to have an apartment building fail, and I don't know if that when that's last happened in Canada. So.
Thank you, Madame Zerillo and Mr. Reisman. Now, Madame Kusi for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Han, thank you very much for joining us. I'm so very sorry I missed the Bill dinner last week. I always enjoy it, and I always appreciate the way we recognize the great Calgarians who are building our city. So thank you very much for that. Mr. Han, in your opinion, how does Calgary market supply compare to other major centres?
I think the evidence of how the Calgary market supply is somewhat reflected in the fact, in my opening statement, our market-based pricing is competitive with pretty much any major metropolitan area in Canada. However, that's going in the wrong direction. Prices are going up for an assortment of reasons, but supply is one of them. And so while we enjoy this competitive position right now, it is important that supply keeps moving forward and that investment in the hard assets that I referred to that unlock supply continues.
And what would be the most significant things that Calgary City Council, for example, could do in an effort to help our industry increase supply? To be clear, Calgary City Council has done a number of positive things, and we've heard
about automation of processes, and certainly through the pandemic in Calgary, we've seen automation of processes, the ability to submit development applications remotely, remote inspections for that matter, that are done by telephone, as a matter of fact. So all of that's been positive. I think it's important for Calgary City Council to, which is in a new community business case process as we speak, to look very seriously at the supply issue. And by that, I mean the fully serviced lot supply issue, and ensure there's adequate supply of fully serviced lots to build going forward. That will be key to ensuring that we don't run short of supply, and that there are a wide array of developers that have approved land supply to develop upon, so that you have the diversity in developers and builders required to meet the market demand.
Thank you. In the implementation of the Government of Canada's housing plan, I recall a few announcements over the last 7 years whereby we would have certain ministers come to the city and make announcements with municipal officials in regards to certain developments or housing developments or pieces of housing being handed over to the government or sold to the government relatively inexpensively for the housing plan itself. Do you think why do you think these dwellings were made available, and what impact do you think that they have on the Calgary housing market?
Well, I'm not sure specifically which ones you're referring to, but I'm going to make the leap of faith that they were handed over in terms of what I think we've heard to as the affordable housing end of the spectrum here. And I can't quarrel that affordable housing is an issue that needs to be dealt with, and certainly we want people to have the dignity and security of a roof over their head at a price they can afford. But I will say for sure that if the only issue that the Housing Accelerator Fund goes to tackle is affordable housing and not the market-priced housing affordability that Mr. Lee and others have talked about, we will find ourselves at whatever point in time down in the future facing an even more daunting task in terms of market-priced housing affordability, and will have inadvertently driven a number of folks that would otherwise have been in the market-priced housing into the affordable housing market. So we need to make sure that the full continuum of housing is addressed by this funding, and that we cover the wingspan of that and ensure that middle-class families have access to housing affordability, market-priced housing affordability.
A significant problem for many years in Calgary was the release of land. Does this continue to be an issue for development?
I would say if we don't see reasonable approvals of business cases before City Council in the current intake that's there, we will be very shortly into a supply crunch.
Thank you, Mr. Han. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madame. Now to Madame Martinez-Serrata to conclude with 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais commencer.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with FCM and Mr. Rumstein. I have a question for you with relation to funding. I know that FCM is already working on structures and with the municipalities and infrastructure. I wonder if you could talk about, do you think that FCM could have a role to play in funding of municipalities that we heard mentioned?
Sure. Thanks very much for the question. And just for members' context, we do have the Green Municipal Funds, a federally funded endowment, and we deliver interventions and related to land use, sustainability, and in the housing space. And that includes the Sustainable Affordable Housing Initiative, which was first announced in Budget 2019. And with that program, we're funding a range of projects across the country to retrofit existing social and affordable housing and build new. Some of those projects I know are quite innovative in terms of creating that extra density and supply that HAF is keen to deliver. We know in the budget there was additional monies for retrofit of existing low-income housing, social and affordable housing. That's a space that we have expertise in, and certainly encouraged to see
Mr.
how
Rubinstein,
that funding is delivered.
I'm sorry to cut you off. My question, yes, I know you do that for housing. My question was, would you do that for the Accelerator Fund?
Yeah, I think we see this program as something that is really something our members will need to tap into directly, and all of us will need that are involved in that housing, sustainability, land use space need to bring our best thinking towards the program and help make it a success. And certainly with GMF, I can share part of our approach to low carbon density and land use. There's lots to learn there that we can help our members with as they access this program. I hope so.
Merci, Mr. Rubinstein.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Lee, around you touch about the labor shortage on construction in a way that this could be a challenge for addressing the housing crisis. What would you think about having a dedicated stream on immigration, on foreign workers on construction? Is that something that would be interesting to kind of address the issue, for one? And how would you see the cities versus rural challenges to do construction? I'm hearing a lot on the rural sector that they have projects, they just don't get anybody to go up there and do construct the houses. So how would you address that issue?
On the immigration, it is critical. On the immigration side, I think it is critical that we really start to better target the types of people we need in this country to do jobs. I think we've spent a little bit too much time over the years focusing on a knowledge economy that actually Canadians are very good at filling, but a lot of skilled workers. This country was built quite literally by people immigrating to the country with skilled trades from other countries, and I think we really need to return to that, and that'll be critical. So any kind of stream on that front we would really welcome. With respect to rural and remote areas, it's definitely a challenge. I think one of the things through the pandemic that has happened is some of those areas have become more attractive, which will, because people can work in different areas, which will hopefully help to bring different people there. I spoke earlier about the need for better productivity. A big part of that needs to be more factory-built, panelized and modular construction, which will also greatly help rural and remote communities because a lot of the work can be done in more urban centers. It takes less people on site to finish a factory-built home in more rural communities.
A quick question, Mr. Ann. What do you think about the, je vais le dire en français, c'est le droit.
What about the right to the City of Montreal has applied its right of first refusal for buying land for housing?
Land?
Yes. No, I'm talking just landing. Like city general, the City of Montreal got the right to first refusal on lands, buildings, and it's something that the government of Quebec is looking into. Actually announced it this morning that it's looking into that.
So your question is, what do I think of the municipality having first refusal?
Yes.
Right? I think in Calgary that is not a requirement, and that the illustration I would give you is the City of Calgary is the largest industrial landowner there is. So in our particular circumstance, I can't see it making a lot of sense. I think it was Mr. Rubenstein from the FCM said that each municipality has different circumstances. So I think the way I would say that is not one size does not fit all in the particular circumstances here.
Thank you.
Madam Martinez-Ferretta and Mr. Hand, that concludes the committee's time. I want to thank the witnesses for for their very detailed testimony before committee today. You can see committee members had a great deal of interest. We could have spent a few more hours, but we don't have time. Thank you for your time, and with that, is it a pleasure to committee to adjourn? Yes. Agreed. Meeting adjourned.